And the detective managed to get the three of them and drag them off to court. They had to spend 2 days in jail in Roseburg, which they did. Well, while they're in jail, the one that they didn't catch is staying out at Billy's. He's waiting for them to get out, and then they were going to go on the rest of their trip. And so Billy wanted me to meet these people. They were supposed to get out at midnight this particular night, and he wanted me to come out and meet them. So I said, okay. I couldn't fathom what possible purpose it would serve for me to meet these strangers, you know. Especially after I heard what it was that they were up to, you know. Dad's a police chief, I mean. So, you know, what do I want to deal with thieves for? But once I met them, it was like, wow, these are really interesting people. And the stuff that they were talking about, they talked about having spent their 2 days in jail doing things like doing naked yoga in Roseburg jail. I could just imagine it, you know. And evidently having a great time while they were there. Or as good a time as one could expect to have in jail, I guess. The one that had stayed out gave me the address that he was living in San Francisco. It's the ferry collected down there at 501 Ashbury. And he said, if you're ever down there, just, you know, give me a drop by, come by and see us. So I said, okay. Well, I was just on fire. They left about 4 in the morning, I think, to go on north. But this was incredible. They were talking about the whole scene that they were into was so liberating just to listen to it. And I had to, you know, I had this opportunity to go down there now. And so now I had even an address to go to. Well, within about 3 days, I was down there. I showed up at the door, and I had this address, and was met at the door by Joey, and he's going, oh, well, yeah, okay. You know, come on in, and we'll put you up, and you can sleep in Jan's bed. They're not back yet. Which I did. It was a little loft off the kitchen. I had $5 in my pocket when I got there. Within 5 days, I had a job and another place to live. It was that fast. And I lived there for a year. It was during that time that I got involved with the fairies and started learning something about goddess worship and magic. And I had just been introduced to, like, hallucinogenic drugs, which was, you know, an amazing thing for me. At the end of that year, I came back to Roseburg. And that's when I started to do things. I lived on unemployment and food stamps for about 2 years once I got back.
Do you remember what year that was?
Would have been, let me think, 1980 or 81. There was a recession that year, as I recall. That was part of the reason that I was able to do it. I drew off of my claim in California first, and then we switched over to my claim in Oregon. And then they granted an extension because of the recession of another 18 weeks or so, and I exhausted that. And then I'd been drawing food stamps the whole time. I lived in this tiny little apartment. This takes us into kind of another interesting side story, but I won't go into it, except to mention that there was grave robbing involved, although I wasn't involved in it.
And, is that the one that was in the paper that time?
Oh, yes.
That soldier that was unearthed from some ancient war?
It was so weird because the guy that was doing it, you know, knew Joey in San Francisco. It was a real shock, you know, when they came to look at my apartment because they were going to move into it, him and his girlfriend. And he walked back there and saw the way that I had the back bedroom set up kind of like a temple. And he saw all that stuff in there, you know, and he comes back out and he's kind of laughing and he goes, I see that you read the Wake deck. Do you read any others? And I says, well, I have the Crowley deck too. He says, oh, I read that one. And he says, I've seen lots of rooms like that in San Francisco. And I go, oh, really? Who do you know in San Francisco? Oh, well, I learned magic under Joey Kane. You didn't? Wow. And I told him, you know, well, I knew Joey Kane. I lived with him for a while. So did I. You know, what a small world. Well, then he's telling me later on, they went ahead and moved in and I moved upstairs. And he mentioned that he wanted me to meet Dad, you know. And I thought, oh, meet his father, how quaint, you know, are we getting married? And then it turns out that Dad, he brought me down one afternoon, and Dad turned out to be this skull, and it was so moldy. And my first thought was, you know, well, isn't this remarkable? I wonder what kind of chemicals he treated that with to get it to look like that. You know, because my guess was that he bought it from a medical school or something, you know. No! It hadn't come from a medical school at all. He'd broken into a crypt out at the Masonic Cemetery and stolen it. It was midnight, he was on acid. It was Halloween night. And so it was a Crowley kind of magic, you know. But once I realized that it was a genuine skull from somewhere, you know, then my next thought was, now don't panic. Don't panic. We've all seen this before, because I was kind of afraid of what he would do if he saw that I really was panicking, you know. You never know, some of these crazed individuals, you know, give them some drugs and they just, well, so, let's see, I've lost the train of the story. This was like part of another story. I'm living upstairs in this apartment.
Roland learned this magic kind of an approach to life and so
I was living in this apartment upstairs on unemployment and food stamps, so I didn't have to worry. There were no job pressures at that point. I'm supposedly looking for work, right? But as long as I didn't have one, I didn't have to worry too much about being, you know, conservative looking, and didn't bother. And so I started doing things like polishing my fingernails or polishing my toenails and wearing eye makeup, you know. I would put on my cape and go down to Payless to pick up a bottle of wine or something.
You're dressed like that.
Dressed like that, yeah. And you know, broad daylight downtown Roseburg. And some of the responses I mean, it was amazing how people would move aside. They'd see me coming, you know, blocks away. We'd cross the street, so it was great. I loved it.
A sense of power, right?
And you know, I knew myself, I'm harmless. I really am, you know. I wouldn't hurt any of these people. But they didn't know that, and they were sure that I was, you know, not only crazed, but probably on drugs and probably, you know, Charles Manson incarnate or something. And the fact that as it later comes out, the fact that I was, that I knew was living in the same building with these people who were grave robbers was like, you know. It was a lot of fun. Well, there were a couple of times I can remember where I would be, you know, bouncing along to wander downtown and do something. And one night I was going to dinner. I recall it was about 5 or 6 in the afternoon. It was summer, so it was quite light out. And I would not only polish my toenails, but then I would wear thongs, you know, so that they would flash and gleam in the sun. I thought it was great.
But you a couple of times did run into some potentially hostile situations, didn't you?
Well, see, this one guy, he yelled at me from his truck, you know, faggot. And I just marched. My first thought was to ignore him. I was going to dinner. But then my second thought was, well, why should I let this asshole spoil my dinner? So I marched right up to his truck, and I told him, look, I don't give a shit what you think I am or who you think I am. I am a human being. I'm a real person, and I have every right to be here, and if I've got enough guts to do this, then I think it's in your best interest to shut up and let me do it.